Good evening. It's January the 2nd, 2025. This is a meeting of the Council Rock School District Board of School Directors Facilities Committee meeting. I'm chairing this evening at Tate School Board, and we'll go around the table and let people introduce themselves, starting at my right, Linda.
Linda Stone, School Board.
Ann Horner, School Board. Nicole Kahn, School Board.
Andy Sanko, Superintendent.
Anthony Rapp, Director of Business Administration.
Jessica Binda, Supervisor of Facilities.
Joe Hidalgo, School Board.
Michael Roosevelt, School Board. Bob Hickey, School Board.
Tracy Osecki, School Board.
Matthew McCarthy, Tech Integration.
And Yoda Pally, board member, is on family travel. So I think we're ready to start. Dr. Sanko, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. I would like to begin by wishing everyone a happy and healthy new year. Welcome to 2025 as we get ready to take on the second half of our school year. We are excited to welcome students back today, particularly at Richboro Elementary School. We officially opened Richboro Elementary School today. It was exciting to be there and watch the students and teachers come in. I would like to offer a sincere thank you and genuine thanks for the hard work of many people that took part in making this project happen, from the support staff to our maintenance team to the teachers and administrators, and of course, you know, Jess, Binda, and Tony, as well as the folks that we had helping us outside the district make that a reality. Our students walked in today to a state-of-the-art building, and I think it just demonstrates the courage of our Board of School Directors to take on projects like this and to provide that opportunity and venue for our young students. One of the things I'd like to say to the Richboro Elementary School community is thank you for your patience. This was the last of our 10 elementary schools without air conditioning. And when I spoke to the kids today, I told them they're not going to need the air conditioning today, but it'll be ready for them when they do need it. So with that, Mr. Tate, thank you. I'll just pass to Jess Binda.
Thanks, Andy. A reminder that for the most accurate and reliable information concerning our district, please refer to resources, websites, and social media platforms managed by the Council Rock School District. We advise the community to exercise caution when relying on the accuracy of social media and ask the community to verify any social media content with the district for accuracy. If you question what you are seeing, need a fact check, or additional details on a matter, please reach out to the district directly. Our contact information is readily available on our website at crsd.org. For the agenda for this evening, we have two items. First is a district-wide landscaping bid, and the second is a district-wide facility study, master planning and facility assessment. So the first item is a district-wide landscaping services. We received 7 bids on Tuesday, December 3rd. We are recommending a 5-year agreement with Digidio Contractors for the amount of $148,855. It would be an average yearly cost of $29,771. The previous 3-year agreement was with Digidio Contractors that totaled $100,981, with an average yearly cost of $33,660. So a little bit different between why we see a decrease in the contract is because the first couple years of the 3-year agreement was establishing a lot of the planting beds. So all the planting beds except for the Richboro sign is established. The Richboro sign will be established this spring. So this is all the plants that you see when you walk into Chancellor here. You see the plantings along the entryway. Some of the schools we have, some of the entryways have some plantings, and then the school signs have plantings. So they come in the spring and in the fall. In the spring they plant flowers, in the fall they plant some mums and some more like the lettuce type plants. So that's what they do, and then they also maintain them as well, make sure that they're watered and cared for.
So, man, so we have our own lands or grounds crews,
Yes,
right? So
yes.
this is in addition to that.
Yes.
And have we looked at in the past doing it all of ourselves?
It would be next to impossible with the staff that I have to maintain this level of plantings. We just don't have that many staff to take care of all of this.
Other questions? Yeah.
I'm fairly certain that the scope was delivered to all of these contractors.
Yes.
But with that knowledge, and thanks for confirming, I find the disparity in cost very intriguing as to why were some so high versus others were lower.
So if you look at the bottom one, the total is $750,000.
Right,
I don't know what they were looking at.
right.
That's outrageous. But if you look at the GDO contractors, they are significantly lower. They've had the contract for the last 3 years, and they've done a phenomenal job for us. So I was confident that they have all of the scope of work, which they have confirmed. And I'm confident with their number that they'll be able to perform this.
Wonderful, thank you.
Anyone else? Great. If there's no objections, this will be on our monthly agenda.
Okay, next is a district-wide facility study, master plan and facility assessment with CHA and Schrader Group. Before we get to that, just two things upcoming, agenda items, again, the continuing conversation with our facility study, and then Churchville controls upgrade that we'll be discussing in February. Okay, and then I'm going to hand it over to Doug Taylor.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'm going to start by reviewing the capital improvement plan that we updated for 2025. It's a very brief presentation. I know we have a master planning discussion coming up, and many of you have already seen the capital plan in the past year, so I won't get too deep into it. Just some general comments. Obviously, we had our integrated team come through, and we reviewed all of the facilities in the district, our mechanical, electrical, plumbing team, structural, roofing experts, building envelope, and took a look at all the facilities and updated the plan in its entirety. This year, I want to thank the district, I want to thank the maintenance team, the administration, for, first of all, allowing us to get through the buildings, helping us see what we needed to see, and also completing questionnaires that are also part of this study. We send questionnaires to the team, and we get feedback from the staff, as well as our own observations. Again, this plan does not address additions or renovations. That's something that will come through the master planning discussions. This is just the physical conditions of the building as they exist today. And the implementation of some of these items will extend the useful life of the building. It could delay or possibly remove the need to fully renovate or replace buildings, but I'm going to talk about some of those buildings that are in need of renovation based on some percentages of capital improvements versus total renovations, and I'll explain that. So the book has 31 tabs. I'm obviously not going to talk about each one of those tabs. It is a pretty detailed binder. It's important to note that this is the capital plan. This is also book number 2 of the deliverables for the master plan. This will provide the assessment of the physical conditions to help us formulate how to move forward in some cases once we talk about capacity and other items. So there's an executive summary, there's a logic matrix that explains how we would identify the needs. There's recommendations by facility and recommendations by priority. There's a comparison of renovations to improvements, and I'll review that as part of the master planning discussion that's coming up next. The evaluations, just addressing warm, safe, and dry issues versus every item that we identify in the plan. If you say, well, what do we really have to do? This will help us identify some of those needs. and I'll talk about that when David and I go to the master planning. A summary of each building systems and plans, summary of roof systems, and then there's a lot of building profile information. A lot of this has been added to the plan this year. We didn't always have some of these profiles included. I won't go through all those, but you can see some of the major components are now profiled, the actual equipment, how many pieces of equipment, the specs on the equipment, so we can have a quick reference whenever we are looking at a project. Completed capital projects over the last, I think we started doing this plan around 2012, so this is version 13, and it's the biggest and best ever. And then some environmental information at the back of the book as well. So one of the items that we use when we identify the needs in the plan are the priority indexing. And again, you won't see many 9s and 10s because those are items that we would generally identify as more emergency type projects that we would identify and address as they come up. 7s and 8s you may see. A lot of 5s and 6s are kind of necessary, should be budgeted. And again, this is a dynamic plan. It's updated annually. And at any given time, some of those priorities could change based on the needs of the district and what's happening at that time. There we go. So it's important to talk about this briefly. This is the logic matrix. Each item that's identified as we go through the building is then kind of filtered through this logic matrix to assign the priorities. So you may see plans out there that are green, yellow, red, and you should do the greens. You know, you don't have to do the greens, maybe you should do the yellow, and the red you should do right away. But this actually runs items through the safety of the item, the improving the curriculum delivery. You know, will addressing the issue help you improve the delivery of curriculum? Educational impact, how many people are affected per day, the physical conditions, the domino effect, impact to community. Obviously, if there's some issue in an auditorium, let's say, and it would affect your ability to lease that space or rent that space, it would affect the community. The life cycle, economic impact, energy sustainability impact, and then life expectancy. So each item is run through that matrix and scored. So in the book, there are hundreds of items, and they all have a unique score based on being run through this. So this is just a sample page. There are many pages for High School North. This is just part of what is in the book, but just to give you an idea of how it works. North is tab 7 in the binder, so we identify where you can go in the book to find more on North if you're looking at the book. The item reference number is the unique number for each item, so if you want to go back and look in the plan to where these items are described, you can go back and find those on the list. That's the item number that as they live in the list. The item description is in the plan. Obviously, when we complete, we'll put that in the column when it's complete. The year of the plan work, the priority, and then the estimated cost of each item plus 30% fees and contingency. So we identify right up front, based on visual observations. Obviously, there's hundreds and hundreds of items we look at. We have, we have certified cost estimators in our office. So we run all those items through our estimating team, and it's based on visual observations initially, square foot cost, unit cost. We can't do physical investigations until we actually are assigned certain projects. Then we'll come back and we'll do more detailed studies and provide updated budgets at that time. And then there's a category which allows us to sort by category as well. So we can sort all different ways. So then we use that information to develop the 5-year plan. We sit with the district and we develop it. I don't expect you to be able to read this slide, but it just shows you how the 5-year plan works. We have a column, the first grade column that you see around the middle of that table is 2025. And then we project each of the next years out after that. But because we're going through master planning right now, we've developed a plan for 2025, the summer of 25, based on projects we know that we need to do. But we're not recommending projects beyond that until we've had the master planning discussions, we know where we might head, and then we can further develop, with the district, what other capital improvement type plans we might consider. Again, we don't want to dive into a building that might be fully renovated or something like that. So we don't want to project until we've had those discussions. So this is the 24-25 summer project plan. So those items that are identified, you can see the unique item numbering. The schools that they come from are the next column, the description of what those items are. And then we're working within a budget of $6 million that includes professional fees. So that's not all construction costs. Those are fees and contingencies that are associated with these projects. And then we just extend those costs forward. So if you were to delay a project a year at 5%, you can kind of see each year out as we project to see what the cost impact is of delaying some of those projects. So that provides the district with some ability to see what it might be if we push it down the road. Now, this is a dynamic plan. Things change day to day. If something were to come up in the district and we had to steer clear of one of these and move something else back in because of an impact on education, students, safety, then we would do that. But right now, this is the plan that we're moving forward with. And then the schedule for those summer projects that we're working on. Again, we were approved to perform these projects back in November. We are actually working through site investigations and surveys now. I was out last week and performed some investigations outside, beating the snow that's coming. And preparing the bid documents. We would be out to bid in the beginning of February, about a month from now. Mandatory pre-bid meetings the first week of February. Every project that we bid, we ask contractors that are interested in bidding the job to actually come here, hear us describe the project, the process, and if you're interested in the project, you need to be here at that meeting and show that you are interested. The public bid opening would be the 26th of February, then we'll review those in March with the Facilities Committee in a meeting similar to this, and seek board approval later in March. And then we have to issue contracts and review the bonds and insurance and all those other things that we get with public work. And they would be authorized to proceed with administrative tasks in April and then physically start the work in June once students and staff are gone from the buildings. The one project that will likely be bid now but constructed in 2026 will be the dehumidification units for the natatorium at North. That equipment is a long procurement period, so it's unlikely we would be able to actually get that equipment and perform that work this summer. However, by bidding it now, it allows us to go out, much like we're doing in Newtown. Last year, we bid chillers for Newtown Elementary School. They're coming in March, so we can install them this summer. So it's a similar project to that. Otherwise, all the other projects would wrap up this summer, and that one the summer of '26. So that's the projected projects, and that takes us into the master plan. Any questions on the capital plan? There's a couple more slides I'm going to review with you that are important documents that are coming up as part of this presentation after David kicks it off. Thank you.
Doug will be right back up, I can guarantee you. So I'm David Schrader, and I think some of you know me. Our firm has done quite a bit of the architectural work throughout the district. We have both an architectural side and an educational facility planning side. So today I'm going to speak from our education facility planning standpoint. And if anybody gets any updates in the Notre Dame, Georgia game, just feel free to scream that. The real original intent of this evening was really to present you with some tools. And tool number one was what Doug just went through, and he's going to help us along just a little bit in a second here. We're developing, well, what I want to go through here is the overall study document, and that incorporates both the 1,000-ish pages that Doug just shared with you. And we've got the beginnings of a 200-page document that is beginning to set up the capacity to enrollment study information. And when we take the next step with those two tools that you have and begin to develop the options, then the options turn into development of the options plus the budget estimates behind those. And ultimately, you will see a progression of process that you'll be able to go through here. We'll just talk briefly about some of the opportunities. That's item 2 there, option development. We'll go briefly through facility assessments and what Doug's document does and translates into kind of from a simple table standpoint. Then a brief review of the enrollment projections, and you folks will remember that Cropper GIS presented to you in November. I'm going to do some of the highlights just so you can see how that translates to the capacity here. And then ultimately we'll get into this functional capacity methodology, which will sound a little bit like voodoo science. And that's what I want to get into because it's a challenge to understand how that all shakes out. And then finally, how that translates to the availability of space in the buildings for the children that need to fit in those buildings. So that's really what this is all about. And those will be the tools that you can work with from that point forward. The facility itself facility document that I just held up here has this table of contents. If this closed, did that shut something off? I hope not.
We're good.
Yeah, you're okay. The weight of the document just did that. So what you'll end up having as a board, the board members will probably walk around with the section 1, which is more or less an executive summary of everything. It'll have just a short paragraph about each topic. It'll be enough information for you to be able to present to neighbors, constituents, colleagues, friends, and so on. The building capacity portion is part of what I'll be going over tonight. Doug's item number 4, facility assessments, has a short several-page document that is expounded upon by what I just shared with you. The document will then start to present the options. And we'll just show you the beginning of what some of the tools are that you have to work with this evening. And then those will turn into budget estimates for you to make large decisions over. Finally, in the appendix, we do incorporate Cropper's GIS's enrollment projections just so the information's there, and then capacity diagrams. Tonight, we took the capacity diagram examples out of the presentation. Mostly, we redacted them for security purposes. Board members do have a couple of examples in front of them that we'll share with you and tell you how those turn themselves into capacity diagrams. Another small font table to try to get a lot of items in here. You are going to have plenty of opportunities at your discretion as a board and as administration. And generally, when we're talking to a school district about their opportunities, they'll deal with additions and renovations. They might deal with new construction throughout the district in certain places. They might deal with, I'll use a different word, redistribution of students. You can interpret that your way. Or it could be a modification of grade structure. So this is what every district has to contend with when they're looking at their future capacities, how those capacities might deal with the enrollments that they see coming in. The things that you are probably going to try to deal with within this matrix, I think we know Wrightstown has a space issue. And so it will bear itself out in the presentation here as we go as well. But you'll have to think about the different opportunities that you have there. Some of those opportunities may be trying to pull some of the students out of the elementary grade structure, not just at Wrightstown, but throughout the district. And an idea there is the idea of a 6th grade center, or a conversion of the middle schools from 7/8 to 6/7/8. So these are the big decisions that unfortunately some of the district will have in front of them. You do have property. So this one right here that I can just reach is the House tract. So there's an opportunity there for the district. If you feel like you need to expand or need to build something additional, you've got that opportunity. You also have the Richboro middle school site. And as you know, you've been using that as a transition building while you try to renovate other buildings, and that has served its purpose beautifully so far. But as you start to evolve out of those situations, what do you do with that piece of property as well? The musts that we know, and these come out of that document that Doug just began to share with you here. We know that you've gone through this great process of renovating your elementary schools. The ones that remain here are Newtown Elementary, which has several sister and brother schools throughout the district that have been renovated, including one that you just opened up today, brand new, so that's fabulous. Moria Welch was built at the beginning of the process when you began your renovation structures throughout the district. Believe it or not, over those years, these buildings evolved and need to be renovated, and so Welch is on that list. Council Rock North is back on the list, and there are renovations to Council Rock South at this point that should be contemplated as well. So these are things that will become musts in your study. These are things that you have as tools and options to figure out what you do from this point forward. The middle school space issue, you're going to find out tonight, you probably have already heard that Holland probably has some tight quarters. And so in that case, as you start to think about that, do you think about redistribution of students to a different grade structure, a 6, 7, 8? Or do you go to a 6th grade center somewhere, or something like that? You're not alone in having to contemplate this. The districts throughout our region do this, and this is what we're used to, unfortunately, having to see. Council Rock High School North, what do you do there? Is it a renovation? Is it finally at the point where it's gone through enough renovations that it needs to be considered as a new structure? Is it a new structure on that site, or is it located elsewhere? Just plenty of tools and options that you have in front of you, and that becomes even more challenging because you do have these opportunities. Same thing for Richboro Middle. What happens at that point? Does it have the opportunity to become an administrative center? Does it have the opportunity to convert to one of these facilities that we just talked about? And of course, you're sitting in a building that I think some of the folks in the room are here for tonight. What happens to administration? It's not a question of Chancellor Center, it's a question of what happens to administration from this point forward. So I think these are things that you would look at, consider as well. A South Stadium. Do you begin to build a stadium, or do you begin to build it in parts, or does it come all at once, or something like that? That's another one that you have to think about as you move here. And then finally, the Twining Ford Road property. Repairs, movement with administration. These are the kinds of things that are out there in this matrix for you to consider. And I'm sure people have others. So this is just the kinds of things that you want to start to think about. Normally we present this at the end, but these are the kinds of things that as you're hearing the information you're about to hear, you can kind of be thinking about a little bit as you move forward. Doug, I'm going to stop for a second, and you're going to do this one more time.
Thank you. So this is included in the capital plan. The list that David just reviewed with you were just thoughts. As all of those thoughts are developed, I'll just go back to that, and we come down to some final list of considerations. Then at that time, we, along with David, will assist in preparing budget estimates for those considerations, schedules, and things that will help the district with the ability to further evaluate those considerations. This document comes from the book. Again, the schools and ancillary buildings are listed on the left. The year they were constructed is the next column. The square footage of those facilities. Then if you were to fully renovate the building at $325 a square foot, that's $250 a square foot plus 30% fees and contingency. If you were to take the buildings and perform that renovation, that's the ballpark cost for the renovation of the building only, excluding site. So that's just looking at the building itself. Then column 5 is the recommended improvements with fees and contingency. So, I'll continue. Then column 6 is the improvements as a percentage of renovation. So if you take what it would cost to totally renovate the building and then look at what it would cost to implement the items our team identified for that building, what is that percentage? And when that percentage starts to reach 60%, you really want to start thinking more about looking into renovations and not putting those dollars out each year for summer projects. It starts to let you know that the building is getting to the point where you might want to consider total renovations. Now, you may not have the money to perform those total renovations for all the buildings in that category, so then we have to talk about what those other considerations are. But it's just a general way to determine when a building is telling you it's getting ready for further thought. The next column is asbestos abatement, what we believe to be some remaining asbestos in some of the buildings based on the AHERO reports that we have from the district and allocating some monies to address those costs. And then the other columns are additives to that. Renovations with the asbestos, recommended improvements with the asbestos, and then total estimated budgets. So what I want to point out here, for example, the top item is High School North. We know that it would be about $120 million if you were to just renovate that building without putting any additions on, without addressing any site. You're looking at roughly $120 million, including fees and contingencies to renovate the building. Now, we know that there's about $60 million worth of work identified in the book if you were to address the items that the building is, calling for at this time. That's about 50%. That's starting to reach the point where it's letting you know that it wants to be, considered for full renovation. It's not continuing plugging along with all those summer projects. So those that are higher than that, we've identified. So the former Richboro Middle School, obviously, that is, very high. That was built in the 60s and has not been renovated in any major way. We've replaced some floors, we've done some things, but, so that's about 100%. The Welsh Elementary School and Newtown Elementary School, both of those buildings are definitely in need of renovation. And again, you may look at the buildings and say, well, it looks just fine, but the infrastructure is tiring, the HVAC units, the rooftop units. There's other components to those facilities that are calling for, help. And you can't always see it from the outside. Now, we have done some work on Welsh over the years. We had some defective cast stone on that building. We had to replace it with limestone. We've had some windows that we've replaced, but we've done some work there. And then the Chancellor Center is about 67%. Now, those ancillary buildings are all going to show up as a lower percentage because when we run them through the logic matrix that we identified, there's no impact really to staff, to educational process, to students. So those percentages will come up lower because we don't have that same impact that we do in the schools. So that is one way that we work to identify some of the buildings that need more effort as part of our master plan. Oh, okay. So, sorry. So the last table that I'll show and then turn it back over to David, the columns in blue on the left are all the same columns we just looked at. Those in orange start to help identify the essential upgrades from the capital plan with 30% fees and contingency. And I would point just to this column right here. I'm not as tall as David, so I can't even reach them. But basically, you said, hey, well, North needs $60.5 million worth of work. But if we were to address just the warm, safe, dry components of that, making sure the roof, the windows, any ADA issues, any tripping hazards, anything that would require the building to be maintained to keep the house students, keep them warm, safe, and dry, essentially, you're looking at about $43.4 million worth of work. So there's still a good bit of work that needs to happen in that building, regardless of the 60 million. It's still 43. And you can look at that across the board for each of the schools, and it helps identify what are the minimal things I should do and what's the impact, so I know, how many dollars are out there to address those projects. So that's another way to analyze the buildings, and I'm going to turn it back over to David.
Okay, I'm going to step back a little bit. So think for a moment. We started, unfortunately, with here are some opportunities for you in the opportunities matrix, all the different things that you can look at, and you'll come up with more. Doug is talking about what each facility needs in terms of dollars to bring it back up and keep it where it needs to be. The other tool that you've got to work with is how much space you need throughout the district based upon your capacities and the enrollments that you see. So where does that start? That starts with the enrollment projections that you were presented with in November by Proper GIS. So we just did italics and bolding on this kind of interesting read through their 9 major points. And if you look at it, item 4 and actually 3 and 2 are more or less one and the same. In that, what they're reading about your district is that there's a migration outflow in the 65 plus age range. And what does that do? That opens up houses for people with younger families to buy. And so that turns into number 2, the in-migration of students and children in that 0 to 14 capacity. And watch how that kind of bleeds down through the thought process. primary factor in your enrollment projection is probably, and you could read through their entire report, but it's less about new house construction. It's more of this in-migration flow of younger families into existing homes, and then there's some new construction that goes along with that. The result of that, elementary enrollment will increase over the next 10 years as your larger kindergarten, first grade cohorts continue to enter the system. And what that does, in addition, because your 0 to 14 grade or age structure is increasing, it decreases the overall age average within the school district. And ultimately, it gets to this point, which the total enrollment forecast is by 341 students by your 2034-35 school year, 10 years from now. And I know they presented this to you. This is how we reread this to ourselves to understand exactly what's going on. So I think that's a pretty interesting analysis. We do all know, though, that 10 years out is a pretty challenging number to actually manage. Your numbers will go up and down over that time, as they have always done. You do a proper GIS study or a study by an outside agency because we used to be required to use the Department of Education enrollment projections, which were merely cohort survival. So all you saw was survival migration of your kindergarten grade structure or your early born students up through the system. This incorporates things like that in-migration or the new housing starts within the district. So that's why these are important studies to follow. And so again, small chart, but the big numbers on the right-hand side, you're starting at 10,421 students in 24-25. The expectation is you'll be around 10,299 next year. And theoretically, you'll be back up to 10,598 in 2034-35. So not a terrifically large increase. It's a 335 student increase, but most of that is happening at your K-6 structure. So when we were just sharing that chart of opportunities for the district, clearly, if you're thinking about where you need to go, you might have to think a little bit about that K-6 grade structure. So that's going to become important to the rest of the discussion here as well. So that's the basis, and we're very thankful that they presented that in November because it dovetailed very nicely with the work that we were doing with the principals in the buildings. So why do we calculate this functional capacity? Essentially, in 1973 and 1974, Department of Education built this funding structure to try to create equity amongst all of the districts in the state. And in so doing, they set up these matrices for how to calculate capacity in the district. And this sounds very simple. 10 classrooms times 25 students equals a 250 student building. That's the way that worked. So when everybody looks at capacities and says, my building has 10 classrooms, therefore it seats 250 students. That was in a day when you didn't have the learning support programs you have, when you didn't have the special education programs that you have, when you didn't have the differentiated learning programs that you have within a district. And so all of those things have happened over the last 45 years, and those numbers are no longer accurate. So what we do is we work with each district to understand what your educational program is and how that educational program actually works to modify that capacity within the district. And I have to tell you that it's fairly subjective. This is why I said this is a little bit of a voodoo science, because it's based on your educational programs, it's based on your district's ideal classroom student counts, it's based on your program structures within the buildings, and it's based on those special ed programs, learning support programs, and so on. And you'll see a little bit more by what I mean here. How do we do this? We gathered all that information that we talked about earlier, including all of your plans. Good news is we had all of your plans because we've done this a couple times for you. We conducted principal interviews throughout the summer and fall of 2024 to understand how they're using their buildings today. You have a unique situation that you're going to, well, the board will see at a certain point in time a series of worksheets within this document that have 3 columns. It is the PDE capacity, 25 students times 10 classrooms. It is the district's functional capacity today, and then it's the district's functional capacity next year when you have full day kindergarten. So the full-day kindergarten, actually, if you think about it, in a building that has one kindergarten classroom, it has to grab a second kindergarten classroom from either some other grade structure or from special ed and learning support. And then you have to figure out where you displace the rest of those programs within the building. So that's the 3 columns that the district will eventually see when they look at that. So that is the process that we go through to determine this actual calculation of all of these buildings for functional capacity. One other art to the science here is that you do have ideal student counts per classroom per grade structure. So if Goodnow happens to have 10, let's say 4 grade 3, grade 4s 1 year, and then the next year they have 3 grade 3s and they move to grade 4, suddenly you have 4 times 2 more students or 8 more student capacity. So you can see the art and science of this because the bubbles that flow through these buildings actually change the capacity based on what grade structure you're in. So if we present something that says a building has 421 student capacity, it means you have between 410 and 430 student capacity in that building. Just understand there's not an exact number in this whole model. So that's part of the challenge of this because you can see what the district's ideal classroom count is per student or per grade. Now, the board has these in front of them. Many districts ask us to pull floor plans out of presentations for security purposes. We've done that here as well. So what you have in front of you, board members, is first an example of the functional capacity calculation for Churchville. This is just as an example to you. And if you look at the floor plan on the left, you see the existing use of that building in the 2024-2025 school year according to the principal. The light blue are learning support and special ed rooms. The dark blue are your traditional academic classrooms according to that principal. So in the case of this plan, you can see where all of those classrooms were allocated for the year 2024-25. In 25-26, if you go to a full-day kindergarten program in that building, you can see that the principal's intention there is to grab the additional instructional spaces on the right-hand side of the plan and free up the light blue area and the upper part that had the red area around it on the left originally. So what that did was it gave that building an additional 3 instructional spaces because they consolidated some of the learning support programs into rooms that they felt they could share a little bit more. Okay? Some of the buildings had that kind of capacity, some did not. And that meant that those rooms had to be displaced somewhere else. So where do you displace those? Do you displace them to another elementary that has capacity today? We know what that means, and I know that those are difficult discussions. Or do you just simply add to the buildings that need to be added to? So you can see that one of the tools in your chest here is additions to a building that will probably need renovation under Doug's plan as well. Or do you move students around? Or do you change grade structures? So that's the difficult part of this whole process. If you go to the next plan, just as an example, this plan has Newtown Middle School. And what it has is just the first floor and second floor plan. There are purple bubbles on the first floor and the second floor plan with rooms that have crosshatch. It's got a dark blue, light blue in it. And you'll see on the second floor, there's a block of 4 rooms, and I see some people are checking those rooms. So those rooms are used for a couple of learning support programs within the Newtown Middle School building. The intent of those was that they would become one more team, because in your middle schools, you run a team structure. And I think the interesting thing about the plan is you see all of the red and the purples on the right-hand side of each floor. And the left-hand side is a lot of square footage without any bubbles around it. So the capacity is all in those classrooms on the right-hand side. Yet because it's a teaming structure where the students remain in a grouping of 4 or 5 classrooms based upon their general education program, they stay in that group until they shoot out to their specials. And that building is a really good example of that because everything on the left-hand side is specials. So you can see how that's not capacity space. The classrooms are capacity space on the right-hand side. We've been asked in the past why the old feasibility studies show, and I'm going to guess here because I do have it here, but let's just say this building says 750 student capacity or something like that. The old model in 1973 and 1974 was a junior high structure. And the junior high structure assumed that all of the students could be in every space the entire day. So you're just rotating students around like you would a high school program. And you just have to be able to free up a space for the students to move to as their next schedule. That's not the way team structures work. The team structures work with all of the teachers working in a group with a set group of students that move around through their general education requirements and move out to the specials for the special time during the day. So it's a very different calculation from a middle school to a high school program. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The old PD model would have said that that building could support 1,000 or 1,100 students because it was set up as a junior high school, not a middle school program. So some of those old Department of Education plans that you saw in the PlanCon studies over the years came from that. The last one that you have, just as an example, we just use South. South's a little bit easier to read than North because you know how dense that academic core of North is. So you would see red all over the place, red bubbles. In South, you can see the wings. And the wings are very interesting because they all have the diagrams around them, the red bubbles, and it shows you where the capacity comes from. The difference is in a high school, you're including your arts, your tech eds, your musics, and your phys ed in that capacity. Because students technically could move into any of those programs at the beginning of the day, and that's first period. So the calculation is very different for a high school to a middle school in that you have so many spaces that are free for certain parts of the day in the middle school, so many that are not in a high school. So when you start going through the charts that you're going to be given at some point, understand that that's where all of this comes from. Okay, last part of that little mix. In any given building, if you filled up 10 classrooms and try to use your optimal student count per grade structure, there's no way that you're ever going to even out first grade to second grade to third grade. You never get 4 times 28 students in a building. There's just no way to do that. So we say that an elementary school is a 90% utilization because to show the true calculation of that, unless you're trying to run your numbers up to 33 students in a certain grade structure, you're never going to get that to even out. And so the industry acceptable way of doing that is to say that a typical elementary school is all those classrooms that have a calculation times 90%. So we would say that if a building's approaching that 90% number, you need to begin to look at the capacity of that building because you'll have certain grades that will start to eke over that number of students that you want to see ideally per grade structure per class, okay? The middle schools, because they have space in them, but because they're trying to run through the teaming structure for your language arts, your social studies, your science, your math, and then whatever the other program is that goes with that, you have the ability to put about 85 to 90% capacity into that building and not have to move out of the team structure. There are districts that will say, we're done with the team structure because we don't want to build anything else. We're going to go ahead and start using music rooms as home rooms. We're going to start using art rooms as home rooms and so on. And that's when you start to see the art on a cart moving through the middle school or when a tech ed program turns into something else. So as long as you want to maintain the programs that you have, then you would look at the middle school staying at an 85 to 90% utilization. And then finally for high schools, because you're using all of that room in the building to try to generate capacity, functional capacity within the building, you really only need to have that at about 80% utilization to have that be an effective building. Okay? That's where all of this capacity information comes from, and it's going to go up and down per building and how you want to use it. And by the way, by what learning support programs and what special ed programs you implement next year, because those take space. So that's what this is all about. So when you take all of that and put it together, here's what you end up with. This is the first, this is for the elementary schools, and this is for what was 2024-25. In this case, in the PDE capacities, this is what you were seeing for Department of Education. This is the calculation count for all of those rooms throughout your K-6. Now, if you don't implement the full-day kindergarten, this is about what you're going to end up with. Why is the PDE number lower for elementary schools than the functional capacity? Because these were all predicated on 25 students per room. And I shared with you that you use 25, 26, 28 as your numbers within your grade structures. So that boosts your capacity in your buildings just a little bit from that PDE capacity. Once we pull some of those classrooms out and turn ourselves into a full day K, we actually, because the principals were all trying to consolidate their special ed and learning support programs, thought a little bit more about how I can work these two teachers, because one teacher uses half the day, the other teacher uses half the day. They were able to gain even a little bit more capacity here across the district in the buildings. It did come down, obviously, from your functional capacity because you're grabbing some rooms out from to get the kindergarten spaces. So that's why it comes down just a little bit. Every capacity we did from this point forward used the full day kindergarten capacity. So what did that do across your district for 2024, 2025, and ultimately 2025, 2026, because that's full day kindergarten? It put your district in the elementary level around 79% full at the elementary level. And we said we want to be no higher than 90%. So across the elementaries, you were okay. You had a few challenges though. Challenge number one, actually Welsh is starting to go that direction. And obviously we talked about Wrightstown, and Wrightstown's at 91%. That building actually feels fuller, more full, whatever the right grammar is, than 91%. And that may be because we have some special ed and learning support programs that we have yet to implement in there. But anyway, that's the case for our current structure with kindergarten in place next year. And I'll just quickly share with you where the middle schools and high schools are. Remember we said we wanted to be no higher than 80% at the middle schools. You're around 93%. So if Holland feels full, it's because it is. And Newtown's right on the threshold, 88%, it's right between that 85 to 89 or to 90%. So that one is still good. I'm going to show you some numbers though that let us take those 4 classrooms and plug them in that you saw as additional learning support program. Those become a new grade structure, a new team structure. And the high schools, we're still working with the high school principals here. North feels like it has more, like it feels more full than 57% full. So we are still working back and forth with the principals here, 74% south. What this is ultimately saying is, right now, your elementaries should be okay with a few exceptions. Your middle schools are approaching and at and above the threshold, and your high schools should have capacity for the meantime. 2034 and 35, using the Crocker JS numbers, you start to see the elementaries catching up. You start to see the elementaries run into a challenge. Across the district, you're at 97%. That's high. So at that point, you would be thinking about what to do with the elementary structure. I think that's what you're getting out of this. You can read right from the Cropper presentation portion right through this that you're being impacted at this grade structure. And you can see the buildings that have just a little bit more room than others. Newtown and Richboro, because it's got the capacity in it today. You built that on purpose. You implemented additional classrooms to make sure that you were starting to take care of some of the challenge in other places. The middle schools, if you follow that Cropper GIS study, the middle schools actually decrease in population over that time frame. And so Holland still remains high, Newtown drops, and between the two, you fall into that 85 to 90% threshold. That's going to be an interesting thing to think about as you go forth here. We had an earlier Cropper study that you guys were given a draft of before Cropper presented to the board. And the earlier study showed the middle school is actually up, and it actually came down in that final version. So that's an interesting thing for us to see. And then the high schools still seem to continue to have the capacity, the functional capacity that we're looking for. So a lot of information. This is that summary. The summary is the elementary schools are currently operating within the 90% as the enrollments increase per the Cropper study. You're going to exceed that, and it shows you exceeded it pretty significantly. The middle schools, you actually drop a tiny bit. You go from an uncomfortable Holland to maybe a reasonably comfortable 2 buildings if you figure out how to work between the 2 buildings. And the high schools seem like they have the capacity, but both of them at least need renovation. So you have to start thinking about the dollars that you have to put into a building because you're trying to keep it up. And you have to try to think about the capacities of these buildings and where you shift some of these structures. So the next steps for the district from our perspective, normally what happens at this point is you've got these tools and you start to think about how those tools affect what you can do from this point forward. We'll work with the administration to continue to develop options. You may want to have a conversation about options as we go here tonight. That's understandable. You saw all that matrix of opportunities that you have, and we can go back to that matrix if you're interested in discussing those. Once we come up with on your behalf a series of options, then we'll develop these budget estimates for those, and it'll be based upon what Doug provided for the renovation side of things, if you decide on renovations additions, or if you decide on some new facilities to accommodate some of that enrollment, then we'll do option cost budgeting for that as well. And then finally select a primary option for you to move forth with. You've done this before, the district has done this before. It's a great challenge, but you have tools at your disposal to move forward with. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute.
If I can suggest, if the board agrees, just if we could get a little bit of context to remind us about this process. What is our timeline for this process working with Schrader and Dewey?
I believe, we had talked about, providing them with information to provide cost estimates and a plan for February. We can try to accomplish that, or, continue to, it can go into March. I mean, I don't, as far as the timeline goes, we can stretch it out longer if we need to. It depends on, what the board's appetite for that is. As far as whether or not you want to make, whether, there's agreement on the options you'd like to see costs for, or if there's, more debate about it, then, so, I mean, we can work towards a February resolution, or more realistically, I think a March resolution, or even beyond that if we have to. I mean, we don't need to budget for it for the 25-26 budget, but so I really think it's up to the appetite of the board.
I think you answered my question well, thank you. That's helpful. All right, floor's open.
I'll say something regarding what you just said. I think the board's going to decide the time frame here. No one's going to dictate to the board, how this process goes, right? We're not looking for guidance on the time frame from anybody. You're looking for us for guidance, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's going to take a few, for me personally, there's a lot of assets out there that we can be using the tools. A lot of people who've been here for years, decades, previous board members, is something that comes to mind. Some people have gone through this before and maybe didn't get it right, when you look at the middle schools. But we have a chance to remedy it, and it's kind of an exciting time. But I think, yeah, I mean, to try to get something by March is reasonable, but a lot of questions. I'd like to have another conversation with you guys once we digest this. I have a lot of, this picks at some pretty deep bones for somebody coming in, you know, almost 8 years ago. I think we can get this done, but yeah, I think just as far as the time frame is concerned, I have multiple things I would touch upon right now, but I'm gonna wait and just digest what we're seeing here, and hopefully, as I said, try to pick what's most important to us. But there's even what you presented, there's things where I'm looking even beyond that. Some of these older schools that were built before Richborough was, and we're still not, you know, they were like, just to mention, I wanted to ask you that maybe off of later, is about Churchville Elementary School, Holland, and Goodnoe. They're the really old ones. And when we first started doing renovations, it wasn't like the renovations we're doing now. I mean, from my standpoint. So I almost see those three schools just off the top of my head of actually looking at, we're gonna renovate, completely renovate 2 new schools built around 2000, while the schools that were built in 1960 will be next on the list. But when you walk through them, me personally, when I look at some of those older schools that I mentioned, Holland, Richborough, and Goodnoe, they just don't have that same pizzazz, you know, that the new schools do. I'd hate to see, me personally, just, I'll say this and stop, is to see Welsh completely renovated before 1967 school, or 1957 school sits there. I've mentioned it before, and so I know that's not the big thing we're talking about here. Mostly is, let's get the facilities right for the kids, you know? And I'm seeing big, my thoughts are, I want to focus on the middle school mostly, the capacities there, try to fix what was not done the way I thought it could have been done. I'll stop there, thanks.
Oh, true. Do we want to go back to slide 4 and look at the options? Is that a good way to
Yeah.
have the discussion? Tracy, go.
Is that the middle schools? I was gonna ask about the middle schools, because I wasn't sure I fully understood when you were talking about the team structure, you know, what the capacity is, if there's capacity for an additional team with those 4 rooms, so if you could explain that again, please.
So I can add one thing for the middle schools. Oops, sorry, I keep going past it here. Right before this. So Newtown has 2 opportunities in it, actually. One is that cluster of 4 classrooms that is a team that was meant to be used for the future. So that adds some capacity to it. The other thing about that building that's interesting is in the floor plans, between the 2 sets of classroom structures on each side, the 2 wing sides, you'll see they have what they call large group instruction spaces. They're really classroom-size open areas on the first floor. And on the second floor, there's a little balcony that looks over that was built with the structure to infill the floor there. And you can basically add 4 more classrooms to that building by filling those spaces in as classrooms and get additional capacity in that building. So there was additional capacity planned in that structure. The challenge at Holland is the same challenge that you had when you did the renovations to it, and that is that the dining space has never quite been big enough. That space is just, it's the middle of the building, it was always in the middle of the building. So if you want to expand that, you'll have to think about some of the spaces against the now bus loop, the old front doors to the building, and think about whether you want to take some of those out, add some classrooms. So there are ways to look at the building to try to help that along.
Well,
I have a bunch of questions, but the one I'll ask, just because we talk about it all the time, I mean, hopefully the one result of all this is that we won't be talking about this once we decide what we're gonna do, is Wrightstown and Holland. However, Holland Elementary I'm talking about. In all the slides that you presented there, it gave the appearance that Holland is only like 71% capacity. All the time I sit in meetings here, I keep on hearing that there's no room in Holland.
Yeah.
And yet it's not mentioned anywhere as being somewhat important. Can you explain the discrepancy, or what am I seeing wrong?
Well, you started with Wrightstown. And Wrightstown, I think we all understand the challenges of that building. We all know that you couldn't expand because of the septic field. So we have that challenge that drove the issues at the building. Goodno's an interesting model. You have several of your autistic classrooms in that building, and those are filling up space that was otherwise academic in that structure. But I do agree with you that when you feel that building feels completely full. As a matter of fact, they're using an old conference room as a gifted room. So I would agree that I'm not quite sure why the 71% shows that.
Holland, you're talking about, not, you said Goodno.
Did I say Goodno? I
You meant Holland.
Goodno's not like that, I'm sorry. Holland, my apologies. Yep.
And the other question, this went to something before that I happened to saw. When you were talking about our summer projects, I saw something there about Holland with needing a new gym floor.
Yes.
Was, the gym floor wasn't done when the building was,
No, so we've gotten all this life out of it since it was renovated. The floor was not ready to be replaced back when that building was renovated.
okay. That's it for now. Thanks.
And just as a comment there, so Doug in his document shows the 20, 30-year life cycle of all the products in there. And of course, at that time, the Goodno floor had 20 years left in it. And at this point in time, 20 years later, that's what is showing up.
Might as well, no one else. Something else I thought was, when you're talking about projections of the demographics 10 years out, is that percentage or just going off the Cropper? Going off the
All
Cropper study?
proper, we use their numbers entirely, yes.
So, I mean, because we're on the decline right now, right?
Right.
Okay. So we're basing everything off of his study, which makes it pretty, looks significant, which I don't know how you could predict it. Like, what if it went the other way? What if it wasn't so bad with the population?
Right, so the first round of these that we shared with administration at the beginning of November, we were using the 5-year Cropper study. And the reason we were using that is because you have relative comfort levels with 5 years, because you can see how your kindergarten grade structure and first grade structure evolved through the district. So you can track with your cohort survival a little bit better what's happening. So that followed. We generally have to use 10-year though to build out, because any construction project, as you know, takes 3 to 4 years from start to finish. So by the time the building's open, you're already into that second 5 years. So that's why with the administration, we decided to go to the 10-year structure.
Which showed an increase.
It shows
a
an increase.
significant increase.
It's a slight decline and then it goes back up.
Which I can say might work. 10 years is tough.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
And then thinking though, if it was a flat, let's say it went up a little bit to where it was maybe 4 years ago, but I think it's even higher than that. It's probably increased back up to where they were, so. Would that affect your recommendations if the population wasn't as dense? Okay. Or
Yes, it would.
projected? Okay.
Sorry, I was just gonna respond to Joe's point, because I think, and you guys would know better than me, but what I've seen in these population estimates is maybe they're like pretty close, but we have 10 elementary schools and the growth isn't necessarily where, like maybe overall it's Cropper is right, but maybe, one elementary school goes way up and another goes way down, and so it averages out. But to the kids in that elementary school that's overpopulated, it doesn't matter that Council Rock as a whole is, where we thought we would be.
What I dislike about this process the most is it becomes a numbers game and you forget about the students. Because now you're trying to figure out where you fit numbers. Bottom line is every student's different and every building's different and all of the cultures are different. And it's challenging to think about this purely from a numbers standpoint.
I have a couple of questions about elementary. One is, it looks like the implementation of full-day kindergarten at Wrightstown takes the capacity from 97% to 91%. And you were saying that that has a bit to do with space reallocation by the principal, but does the implementation of full-day kindergarten at Wrightstown actually reduce the pressure there in any way? I didn't think so. I mean, that's what the numbers would say, but.
The one thing that's not listed in this group here is the capping structure that you built into Wrightstown. And we were recognizing that, and realizing that that bubble needs to squish somewhere else to make that happen. So we put less quantity of each grade into the building, and that's how that happens. And so it has to go somewhere.
Yeah, okay, that answers my question. And the other is, I'm looking at the slide with the 20, 34, 35 enrollments at elementary schools, and it shows 3 of the elementary schools above 100%.
Yep.
It's 18. So I mean, the 3% increase in total population is sort of almost margin of error, right? But what it shows for the elementary schools is a pretty clear-cut challenge.
Because it follows, unfortunately, it follows exactly the Cropper study.
Right.
And so that says that you're gonna see that growth structure in your 0 to 14-year age range. And that's where it's appearing.
Right.
So the 3% is actually at the elementary level.
Okay.
And more, because the middle schools, I almost slipped.
There's a
there.
decline, yeah.
Increases. Yep.
Okay.
Joe first.
I've already said it before, I was interested, and I might as well say, looking for some feedback. I'd like to see the third middle school come back and add 6th grade. I think that's worth looking at, regardless how terrible that might be to some people. I just feel like that was something I thought would be good.
Just looking at that here, I mean, it's there, it says Salt Five Stone's gonna be at 100%, even with 5 additional classrooms that were just put in? What?
There's a lot of growth in them.
And there are more kindergarten classrooms, so you're not getting just 1 for 2 or 2 for 1, you're getting 4 for 2 or something like that. I'll have to go back and look at the numbers, but that's what drove that one.
Well, of course, that's irrespective of what you called redistribution.
I don't know what word to make people happy with.
So there's.
I did have a question on, I mean, there's a lot of information here to absorb. I'm kind of new at this, but there are a lot of decisions to be made, and I can't see how we get to that point by having a once-a-month meeting. I'm trying to see how we can meet either focus groups or something to get through some of these issues, be able to have reasonable questions for the gentlemen as they come up, and questions regarding dollar amounts before we can actually come anywhere near a final decision. And I assume that you have to look at this master plan before you can even approve the summer projects, to some extent, because there's some overlap there, is that correct?
I
Some of
think,
those summer projects
would you?
might be
Doug spoke-
impacted.
Yeah, Doug spoke to that earlier.
You can speak to that. Jess and I looked at projects that really wouldn't be affected by, what decisions are made down the road. Now, we're talking about the humidification units at a pool that need to be replaced. Regardless of what happens to North down the road, you still need those units on that pool now. Paving projects, some finishes, buildings that aren't going to be touched. They're, generally projects that, aren't going to be undone as a part of this, especially based on the timing of when some of these things would actually happen in an overall master plan schedule.
So anyway, I'd like to see maybe more frequent meetings in order to get through some of these decisions and more quickly.
Would that be facilities committee, you think, or are you suggesting?
Yeah, I would think. And then the other question that community is probably gonna have when you first look at some of these numbers, these millions of dollars, what kind of impact will that be financially on the taxpayers? I think they would want it, I don't want them sitting out there going, oh my God, I'm gonna have to put a lien on my property in order to pay a tax bill. So how do we deal with these kinds of projects long-term? Which, I guess, Tony, you can kind of address some of that, right?
You're asking me right now?
Yeah.
Well, we built a little bit of that into this year's budget. We increased our debt service amount, and that was transferred into debt service as was planned. But, we'd have to look at, obviously, all of these large projects would have to be funded with debt. We do have an additional amount that we budgeted as far as debt for this year that we put into, so if we have some money sitting in debt service that we could use to pay down debt, to pay debt, and we have extra millage that is earmarked for debt. So we began that process. Because the one thing that you have to watch out for is the fact that when you get to a phase where you want to have to spend a significant amount of money, where you would have to raise you don't want to have to raise taxes to the point where you need to go to a referendum, because you're not going to, it's not going to happen. So a gradual increase to help with that issue. But the good news is we do have some debt that's getting paid off in the next few years that's opening up more room to borrow more money. But I mean, we have the ability, but we do have some debt that we structured to pay more principal in the future than now, with the thought process that when, and there's a trade-off between what the great returns on investment that we've been experiencing over the last couple of years. When interest rates come down, we would refinance those debts to get a better interest rate on those bonds. So there's a whole lot of moving parts in there, and I can't give a whole lot of answers as far as what we can do. I mean, we have the ability to borrow. We have a significant amount of debt. We also have the ability to borrow a significant amount of more debt. Not that I'm recommending that, but
the borrowing is, when we build debt, it's not direct impact on the taxpayer.
Well, that depends. Like I said, we built in some debt increase in this budget so that we had more room to borrow in the future. Would require us to look at borrowing, maybe having another portion of a tax increase in the upcoming year to increase our ability to pay for debt. I mean, we can budget. The one thing that we shouldn't do is put ourselves in a position where we're exceeding our debt in a year that the debt service fund can't cover that excess, and we end up having to transfer more than we've planned from the general fund into the debt service fund, if that makes sense. Like we don't want to, I know for a fact what we need to transfer into debt service from the general fund this year. I would not want to borrow money where we're looking at a year where we say, oh, we have $23 million worth of debt, we're only transferring in 20, and we've only got 1.5 million in the debt service fund to cover that difference. So now we're $1.5 million. that we don't have covered, that we would have to borrow more from the, have a larger, without, you know, with a tax increase for just that way. The point is to keep the taxes that the amount that you're transferring in level, so that you're always paying the same amount of debt in to the debt, the money into the debt service fund to cover your debt.
So for the least amount of impact to the taxpayer, you could give us a borrowing capacity
Yes.
every year, so we
Yes.
know what we could stay
Yes,
within.
and it
You've
depends on what we-
developed
what
a
we pay
framework.
off, what we
Okay.
pay off. But we're not gonna be able to, you're not gonna be able to do everything that probably needs to be done without, and that's why we've tried to moderate that increase, so that we don't have some big increase when it's time to do these projects. And we have an increase, smaller increases that are part of the annual budget to raise that amount, put more money into debt service to cover any of those years that where we would exceed the transfer, if that makes sense.
You even mentioned Council Rock North when we were talking about this current year's budget, looking ahead toward.
Yeah, I think that as I sit here and listen, it's nice to hear some colleagues and members thinking about elements that we've just saw, recognizing that what has been presented tonight has only really been a slice of the loaf of bread that these gentlemen have produced. Recognizing also that we've had a few days over the holidays to look at it electronically. There is a lot of information. There are a lot of moving parts. It does impact, this is really the future of Council Rock, which is why it's incumbent upon us to get it right. And in that, it's been nice and comforting to hear that we have to avoid looking at this as a numbers game. Instead, recognize it's a student, it's a building, it's a cultural issue, and also recognizing that this is impacting our taxpayers. And balancing that is very, very important when you add in the future of Council Rock. So it's been comforting to hear some of these. So with that in mind, I am suggesting, recommending strongly that we work hard to avoid the temptation of fixating on a specific problem or a specific solution. That we allow the process to reveal this, and as it was also pointed out, additional problems and potentially solutions are going to come up. It's very important. We may feel like we're making significant progress because our timeline is tight, but if we start gravitating toward those smoking guns and magic bullets, it's only going to cause problems amongst everybody involved. So if we just allow the digestion of material, look for commonalities and overlaps, these processes tend to work better and reveal themselves as far as what we should do. And it is, after all, a master plan, which is a plan that we're guided by, much the way a budget is, or a 5-year or a 10-year budget or a building. It can change as some of the things change, but this is a large guideline on what to do. So I just wanted to mention that, to just resist that temptation to fixate on a solution. We're all sitting here in this entire room tonight, and our brains are flipping through a whole bunch of additional problems, additional solutions, and what we think this is revealing to us. And I think that's important, but let's not get trapped by that and fixate on any one particular one. That's what I just wanted to indicate, and it's been nice to hear a lot of this coming out.
I have a question. Oh, please.
Well, I just had one clarification, Mr. Tate, thank you. There was a question, an example of Sol Finestone. Where did those numbers come from? Was it extra classrooms? You actually have to dig even further into the numbers. Sol Finestone's capacity, or sorry, their enrollment projections based upon Cropper's numbers were 643-ish students today, 907 in 2034-35. So that's actually where that building's increase or decrease in capacity comes from. So it's not always necessarily the reallocation of space, sometimes it's the calculation from the enrollment projection.
I really appreciate your comments, Michael. I think that's a lot of good reminders, particularly about the fact that this is a master plan. And we're not going to be approving specific projects. This is a master planning process. And that leads me to a question about what do you all want to get from the board tonight? What was your expectation or hope? And one of the things we talked about was making choices about which projects we want to see cost estimates generated.
Well, what the board, first, I'd like to put the same thing to say with the board needs to control this process and needs to, it is their timeline. And that's what I was trying to say before, maybe not as succinctly as you put it. But,
No, go ahead.
If the board is not ready to provide that tonight and would like to have other discussions on that beforehand, then I don't want to, certainly don't want to rush you into providing that. I don't think we would want to rush you into providing that tonight. If you'd like to take this and digest it, and we can look at another forum, or obviously we'd have to advertise up another meeting if you wanted to discuss it, or wait till next month's facilities meeting. So I think it's up to you. What we're looking for you is to provide us with the information that decisions or the interest that you have in things at the time that you're ready to present the interest that you have for those things.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to say one thing, because I mean, taking what Mr. Roosevelt said, I mean, if we're going to ask about certain things, I don't want to think that I'm dwelling about it. I mean, I did come out and speak about one specific solution. I think we're not going to make any decisions and give feedback tonight, like concrete, like go out and do all that work. I mean, I think we need at least the whole month for let the community is what really is very important. More than what we think personally, it's about the people we represent and what they think, 100%. So got to give them time. That's why I posted it to my Facebook to say, hey, guys, we're doing something very big here. You really got to get engaged and pay attention, because it will impact the generation to come. So I can quickly go to, because I've been thinking about these solutions forever, have a discussion while I have these engineers in front of me and architects. It's really important to ask the questions that we can while we're here, but just because I ask about a certain solution that has already had my mind from before, doesn't mean like that's what we're going with. So I think there's going to be another 2 meetings before we come up with an idea to say, this is where we want you to go. And we're going to all have to go back and get the feedback from each other and our constituents. So I'm going to focus back on what I was thinking was the 2, if you think about closing Richboro Middle School, going to 2 middle schools, and then you see the projections going up, and now we see capacity issues in 10 years at both middle schools, even in Newtown, which is, that's going to jump to something even further, but I'm not going to do it. But to say about that is that if we opened up a new middle school and through 6th grade in there, that would alleviate all of the, would you consider that alleviating, you think that the capacity issues at the elementary schools could be solved by taking 6th grade to middle schools if you have to build another middle school? Is that something that you thought was, somebody must have talked about it before, but that would shoot a lot, I mean, that would take out a lot of birds with one stone.
If we were asked to present options, that would be an option.
And that might help alleviate all capacity issues by removing a whole
We would have to
level,
run all
3
the
classrooms.
numbers. We'd have to run the numbers, right, because you would have to adjust because you'd want to keep the capacity similar amongst 3 buildings. So you just figure out what your 6th grade enrollment will be, and that'll tell you how much more you need as a new middle school.
And whether it's even feasible. So maybe a little more digging into that to say, before we look at economics, to look at the feasibility before we spend all the money also doing the numbers. Okay? That's only one piece of the puzzle.
That's an interesting idea.
Thank you.
I was just gonna note that, I mean, we shared a lot of information tonight, we talked about it. I certainly don't wanna overstep, what we're, our expectation, your expectations are of us, but if you had another meeting, you needed a workshop or something to that degree where you needed Dave and I and team at a meeting, then certainly we could be there to help, work with you and your team to answer questions, as that session's happening, so that you're not developing a list and then going back and forth, to help with that. I don't know that we expected to go back with a concrete list of things that we were gonna come back and answer for you after spilling all this tonight, right? But, and to Michael's point, any single project is, a year of approvals and 2 to 3 years of construction. So even if you start talking about these projects in a master plan over a series of years, you're really extending these out pretty far to get there. So David mentioned, in 10 years to try to actually resolve all these things is not that simple. And we'll start to develop the budgets, for these options that we ultimately land on for you guys. We'll work together, we'll develop budgets, we'll develop those schedules that show you, here's the approval phase, here's the, construction phase, here's the estimated increase in those costs as each one of those years, is projected out, so we understand the inflationary, impact the best that we can project today, not knowing where things will go, but have some idea, because we do know things go up, generally not down. So we'll work together to help develop that, so then Tony can take that information back to EFM and start to develop models based on actual costs, not, estimates of where things might be if we do this or that. And we'll develop, those costs to give you the scenario, if you were to do just what's in the book. If you were to take what's in the book and put additions on something, if you were to replace something, just so you understood, the impact of those. Because the first question that always comes up from community is, well, why don't we just replace it? Well, when you see the cost of replacement compared to some of those other projects, that might help you answer those questions and help, help the community understand. So we'll work closely with you as this all happens. But I just wanted to put it out there that if you, want us to, at a session to help you, we're certainly willing to do that.
Hey, I have a question. I guess it's primarily for Dr. Sanko, but anybody is welcome to chime in. I'm interested in how we could best, maybe it's a question for Andrea, sorry. How could we best solicit feedback from the community? I know we're probably premature for like a survey or something like that. I also think we're premature for a focus group. So what, maybe a email directly about master plan at Council Rock or, something like that? What do you recommend?
So I'll start and I'll pass the baton to Andrea if you don't mind, but after these committee meetings, we post the slide decks and we post the recording on the YouTube channel and to our website. So everything that you've all seen tonight, it'll be made available to the public tomorrow. So that's a natural thing that we do. But I get your point in terms of sometimes no matter how much we push things out, people are saying that they didn't know about it or didn't hear, so.
And I want to hear from them, not just them hearing from us.
No, yeah, understood.
Well, I think the key thing is to understand what we're sharing. Until this board and the people in this room have a very clear understanding of what they're sharing so that we can answer the questions. That, to me, would predicate when we begin to invite feedback. Because I'm going to guess that someone who's not plugged into the school district completely at this level, because this is granular and this is technical, if you think about it, they have to be educated on exactly what they're looking at and all the, even on the surface, all the little pieces of what it's going to impact. So they can see the grand picture and then they can take it apart just like we're doing. Now, the problem is given the time constraint, that's a lot to do in a short period of time. We'll use any method we have available to share the information. But I think the first thing we need to do is to understand what we're sharing.
I have some feedback, please. I had asked today that this be posted to the Facebook, to the front homepage of the school district. And I was told what Andy just said, which was it will be hidden. It's in a document that people aren't going to be able to see. What she's asking for, Ms. Oseki is asking that we open it up to the public now so that you're saying they need to be educated, but if they don't know about it, we're gonna, please, can I just finish?
Oh, yes.
We're just gonna digest everything and understand it, and then while I'm asking right now that I need to tap into the best resource I have as a school director, which is the community, we're gonna sit here and say, no, we're gonna wait until we fully understand it. We're never gonna fully understand this, to be honest with you. And I really think that it is upon ourselves to get ahead of it and to open it up. I mean, I don't know why we would wait.
My only caveat, I agree with you, however, there are social media participants who will take this data, we've seen it all the time. One in particular takes any data that's presented at these meetings, completely pulls it out of context, adds some political bend or twist or dialogue to it, and then really gives this board a harder time. It makes it harder to share things because the information's twisted.
But I understand, but listen,
The board's okay
listen,
with that.
but here, can I just finish?
No,
No, but I'm gonna say that, but just putting it on, it's still posted, they're listening, that's not letting everybody else the opportunity to get that information by it's not gonna solve your problem by not posting.
That's true.
So all I'm saying is, that's the first thing I wanted to do when I saw it, and that was make it open. People aren't gonna understand it, half the people on the board might not even fully get a grip of what's going on, and nor do I have a full grip. But to Tracy's point, this is something that we're under no time constraint. If we have a time constraint, you tell me what the time constraint is.
Oh, no,
You said time
It's
constraint.
so easy, but I can do this as we're speaking.
No, I'm talking about the time.
Look, I don't want to get into a back and forth here. Look, we could have this,
Well,
I don't think nobody's suggesting that we're not going to share this information public. I think Dr. Senko just said these slides get posted after the board meeting. We're sharing this publicly. I think,
And then I'm going on this conversation, you don't understand the conversation just went. The conversation went that Tracy was saying, how do we do it? He says it goes against what I emailed, saying we're gonna put it in a subcommittee folder for facilities, and that we're gonna wait. I just don't see how that's transparent. This is not very
Are
transparent.
you asking to have it on the front page of the Council Rock webpage?
Oh, no,
or just
I'm
have
saying
some
we have to
document that
educate the people and put it out there.
agreed.
And we're not gonna wait to let people, like a couple months till we fully understand it, to let people know that this is going on. So I think a workshop would be a good idea, but people won't know a workshop's happening unless we let them know.
No, but we will let them know. We always do. Ann, go ahead, please.
Could you go back to the screen where it has our must-haves, our, the ideas of
The options?
the options?
Page
Yeah.
4.
If you could go back to that for a second.
I will definitely go past it mistakenly. Oops, I did it.
This one, yeah.
Yes, that's what it was.
I'm all right.
Page 4.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, slide 4,
So
yeah.
that's basically our option idea page, and that's a start, that's the start, right? So look at this page, this is the one I'm referring to, right? Is this something that you're saying that we could just blast out there? Just to say, this is where we're starting, this is the beginning process. We're not deciding on any of this, this isn't a decision, but this is our starting point. And this is where we need to start, and we need to gather information on this right here, right? That's our basically summary of our options ideas.
That's certainly subject to change, right?
Right, correct.
Addition and deletion.
Right, this is
itself.
our starting point
Yeah,
of
some-
no
those must be-
not decision
You may
made.
have other musts, you may move must to a different column, you never know where it will all go as you have your conversations.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't want to do this tonight at all. But like as I was looking through this, I'm just wondering if maybe, like I said, and getting feedback from the public and everything else, is maybe we could try to go through this as a group and see if there's any consensus on things that we agree on as a group. Nine up, I'm just gonna, I'll go into my pet peeve, I guess. I'll say Council Rock, the South Stadium. If we can go through the group and we decide as a group, hey, let's do a gradual build, and we have a so that's something that we can say, okay, let's put this in the bag and something to think about. We're not gonna spend any money on it yet. It's still just part of the plan, but okay, this option gets number one. Because now we have to also run it by Tony and everything else, because as you were talking about the finances for all, what's this gonna cost us? But maybe there's some things that we can agree about that are maybe a little more important, or set the priorities that we need to do as it relates to this, because, I mean, the thing we're supposed to be doing, and unfortunately, we become property managers, is we're supposed to be educating kids, and not any of these dollars actually educates kids or does what we need them to do, but it's a necessary evil, I guess, in some regards, but in some regards, then maybe it's too much. It's like some of our buildings, like, did we have to go Taj Mahal where we could have went Marriott, or something like that, But maybe there's some way we can go through this and have the conversations that say, and we can find some consensus on some of these where we don't actually have a disagreement on something, and who knows? And in the meantime, the public's giving us ideas. I mean, I get ideas from the public all the time. I mean, I've mentioned before about, somebody came up to me with the possibility of a Wrightstown. It's just a possibility. And it's things that we can discuss, but I mean, obviously not tonight. First of all, thanks for the presentation. I mean, I know, just trying to read through this, I can't imagine the work that was done, and I appreciate all that. And in addition, how you incorporated it with the Cropper numbers. So thank you for that. But like I said, I agree with Ann. Maybe this is like our starting point. Maybe we can find some consensus. And, there's some things we may like that Tony's gonna say, okay, but our $18 million debt service now is now 20. And then we gotta make that decision on whether or not, then we are gonna raise taxes on those taxpayers. Because I don't know if when you were talking about that, I don't know if you're aware that we have this big graph that we pay, I believe it's like 18.6 million or something like that, Tony, every year for the debt service.
And it shows a decline.
Correct. What we try to do is we try to keep it at that, and then over the course of time, it goes down. But what happened was, the reason why we added $1 million is because we were going to be above that number.
Yeah.
So we had to build in so we could borrow more money. But just say North, for example, if you're talking about an $80 million project, well, where does that 18 million come in for our debt service? So even though we may all want it, well, then we got to decide as a group, how are we going to pay for it? With all these things, there's a cost, but maybe there's some things though that we can find consensus on, and with working with finance, figure out what's gonna work best, for the district. I mean, because the bottom line is we gotta try to educate these kids and fit them in our buildings and do it in a just, fair way and go from there. And like I said, I don't care how it gets posted out there, Joe. I don't really care what other public websites say, If you want to say something publicly, hey, like all these people here, come to a meeting, open up your mouth and say something, and see what happens. And I assume all the people here probably hear about Chancellor.
Yeah, well put, Bob. Thank you.
Mr. Hildal, I want to be clear. I never suggested that we hide anything or bury anything. I just told you what our practice has been, and after a committee meeting, we put it on our website. So my response to your email and your text was just simply that.
The technicality of it, and that's fine. I wasn't saying that, but so that's what I'm saying. I would like it more than just being put in that. That's me personally. And I was like, this is what we do, but I'm saying, the first thing I did, and I'll do it again, I took it down because there was a schematic of the school classrooms on there, so I took the PDF out and asked them to redact it. Or asked if Don thought we should redact it. But to get the process moving, if we go back to this solution here, construction musts, those are the things that, the 4 renovations. We can start by doing the financing for that, and you'll see there's not gonna be much room left for anything else after you look at those construction musts,
So
would be my opinion.
you're touching on a point that I was anticipating we would be discussing tonight, which is, do we as a board want to specifically designate certain projects for cost estimating at this point? Because
Well, what I'm
that's,
saying is the must is basically, the engineers just told us these 4 projects in the second column are ones that we have to project out over the next 10, unless I'm reading it incorrectly.
agreed. So my point is,
So that has to be done. The financing, once you do the financing for the 2 high schools and those 2 middle schools, that's about $200 million.
yeah, my point is, do we want to, this evening as a board, direct the administration
No. I'm gonna slow it.
Can I finish?
Slow the speech down.
no, just to get cost estimates on those must projects? That's my suggestion. Does
That's what
that
I'm
make
saying.
sense?
I think I was saying that before you started talking.
Well, we're trying here, gentlemen.
All right.
Aren't the numbers already there on some of the previous slides? We already have those estimates.
They are if you were to just renovate the building, but if there are site-related issues and things, we would incorporate that into an estimate. We put, the professional fees, the soft cost, we would put any kind of, if you're projecting these out to a certain year, we would project the cost to those years. So there's more that would go into an estimate if we were to do, it's part of what the service is for you. So this is what we're going to do as we develop these options, is provide those budgets and schedules and see,
Those dollars are for renovation, not replacement, though.
So if you want to, I think it's important that you look at all of those costs
Yes,
so that you can answer folks when they ask the question, why would I pay this to renovate it? Why wouldn't you have just replaced it? If we give you the replacement cost, you can answer that question.
right.
So those are the kind of things I think as we begin to develop, options together, we would look at. So you have option, it might be north option 1, 2, 3, and 4. And many times when you're finished, it's option something else because you come up with other costs as you go. But no problem, we can do whatever you need.
Thank you.
No, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I was gonna ask about, when you're talking about the estimates that are in this slide deck, I had a question specifically about Chancellor. We had been given the numbers, like to keep the lights on, to keep it warm, safe, dry, $6 million, to, it may be $10 million additionally to retrofit it to what we need. If my math is right, that's $16 million. I didn't see $16 million on the slide, so I was wondering, how does that factor in? And I don't mean to get on a tangent about a specific project, but I want to understand how, if those numbers are accurate, if the Chancellor number is accurate, then it makes me feel like the other numbers are accurate,
Yeah, the numbers are accurate, yeah.
Okay. So can you go to that slide? Matt, are you doing the?
Slide
can you go to the
5.
slide where, or, sorry, maybe you're doing it.
Yeah, it's 5.
So am I looking, for Chancellor as an example, I'm looking at the 11.4 number?
The 11.4, and that is looking, again, that's building only. That's not necessarily the site issues related to there's other costs. If you're looking at what it would cost to renovate the building, that's not site cost, that's just the building.
So it doesn't include like the foundation excavation, or is that included?
So our recommended improvements today are in the $8 million range.
Okay, so I'm looking at column 5.
Column 5, yes.
So that's warm, safe, dry, that's up from the 6?
No, Warm Safe Dry is the next slide, but Warm Safe Dry wouldn't necessarily apply to this building because it's not a.
Warm, safe, and dry.
Very warm, safe, dry.
It doesn't generally facilitate.
For adults.
So I'm sorry, I need you to tell it to me again.
So.
Is this 8 million in comparison to 6?
6.5 Warm Safe and Dry here.
Okay, so there you go.
It is on that slide.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I think that we're on a good tangent, and this is probably going to be a process where we zoom in for a minute, and then we pull back and look at other things, and zoom in and pull back. So with that, can we evaluate, I think we just heard one about Chancellor, and Chancellor has a similar building problem elsewhere in the district, which is Wrightstown. Both of these regarding what we would ideally like this to be for the next 10 years. We either don't have the property space or the structural capacity to expand either the footprint or add square footage vertically, right? Is there that level of evaluation? Do we have those problems with any other buildings? Are we limited by a square footage footprint expansion or a vertical height expansion? Do we have any that are more expensive or less expensive? If we can break it down into capacities like expense, ability, time to implement, ability to expand, and how it impacts functionality and education. I mean, toward this end, I think it would be helpful to hear from the administration. We've touched on, or this page specifically touches on the idea of a 6th grade center, right? Do we have space for that in any of the buildings or any of the properties that we have, right? To Mr. Hidalgo's point, does this solve other issues at elementary school if we're doing something at the middle school level? If we can sort of have that checklist built in to look at this, to make us understand really quickly, look, we can't expand Wrightstown's footprint outward, we can't expand it up, right? We all know that, and it's unfortunate. Are there any others that fall into that capacity? I think we've talked before about Chancellor, how it lacks the capacity for training teachers and how it lacks the parking capacity. We've all been here on a night when there's a lot going on and some of us are parking on surrounding streets. So are there any other buildings that have these easily identifiable sort of checklist items or hits, depending upon how you want to look at it?
Is that a question for right now or one that we develop as we go?
It's probably going to be, let's just say it's a little bit of both. There might be some that you could answer right now. I expect fully that this is going to be an ongoing thing.
One common thread that people like to ask about are second stories on single-story buildings. And the challenge of almost every roof built for a one-story building is that it's a roof load, not a floor load.
Correct.
And so you have to build outside of the structure, build a structure across the top of that building, and then start building the building. Then you have to add vertical circulation, stairs, elevators. So it turns into much more than people think it is. We have actually done it. We did it in a Northeast Philadelphia building that had a footprint like that. So there, the cost of ground was we have no more. The cost of we have to get the students in there meant we could afford to put people above. That is not generally the case in a suburban school. So that's a challenging one that we often say take off the table. Second one that comes up in many cases is build a parking garage. And that is, and I'm just pulling that off the table immediately here, Jess. Jess shook her head real quick. That typically is 4 times the cost per space of a ground floor parking space. So that's just for fun.
So then there's other things to think about, right? So, I mean, Wrightstown, could you possibly expand Wrightstown? Not without a lot of other costs, right? You know, so I don't want to say no to anything, but we study all of those things. There's going to be costs that there aren't going to be at other schools. You're going to have to, first of all, you have to go to DEP, you have to try to get approval to expand, you know, the sewage treatment plant, right? And you'd have to increase the size of the lagoon, you'd have to add another spray field. Even if they permit that, now you have the issues of a cafeteria that's undersized, all your support spaces are undersized, and all your support spaces are challenging to grow in that building. Could it be done? Yes, but there's going to be a lot of footnotes to it. North High School, is another building that's slightly challenged in that it was renovated, in the 2002, 2006-ish, along with, the South project. But all of the infrastructure was not replaced when they did so, right? So South is trailing behind in terms, it's ahead in terms of its condition, because even though they were done at the same time, South's all new domestic piping, all new infrastructure, and North still has some 1970s components. So that's why that building is, and it's a 1970s building, not a 2002 building. And the other thing with North is that the stormwater is all dumped and discharged to the basement level and then via bilge pump, pumped back out. So the building has some challenges with stormwater management internally. So there's all sorts of things to look at and consider that, we'll certainly footnote as we go.
How long would it take you to make that sort of analysis in bullet points for all of our buildings? At least starting with the ones that we're considering.
That's kind of an interesting way to work backwards towards a solution, and that's not a bad idea. The one that we would throw in there, so I don't, you may have some others, I don't see tremendous issues with some of these other sites. What you will run into in almost every case that we always run into is impervious surface calculations per zoning. Because they're almost all built within residential districts, therefore they have to use the residential code that goes along with it. So there will be zoning challenges to many of these solutions.
That would be nice to identify. I think that would help the community as well as everybody sit around this table to have some of that, unless somebody disagrees, of course.
It's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost 9 o'clock. We have some people here from the community. Does anybody want, board members, further questions or comments?
I have some questions.
Yes, ma'am, we're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
If I may, Mr. T, administratively, we couldn't agree with what Ms. Oseki and Mr. Hidalgo suggested. This is a larger conversation, one for the whole community. And though we can't sit here and give you airtight answers of how we get it out and get feedback from the community at this time, it's important that we do that when the time is right.
Great, thank you. I agree. I know Mr. Hidalgo agrees. I'm sure everybody does. All right. Are there any additional comments, questions?
I would just reiterate, does anybody have any questions for these guys while they're here?
That was, thank you. That was the next words out of my mouth.
I would love
Mr. Schrader, thank you. Doug, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I think that concludes the presentation and discussion. And why don't we open the floor to public comment? If you would identify yourself, where you reside, and try to stick to 3 minutes, please.
I just have a few questions. Number one, I live in Newtown. I've lived here over 30 years. My name is Terry Riley. Number one, I think it is really important for the community to have access to the report. I would like to be able to see that. Obviously, I cannot come with questions if I'm not able to look at things, number one. Number two, again, having access. So from what I understand, I can go to the website of the school district to get access to all the slides. Does that also include minutes from the meeting, if anybody, including that information too? You have a recording secretary?
One answer is public comment.
The YouTube meetings.
Yeah. We don't typically record written minutes for meetings. No.
Okay, so then I really think it's
There is a
important.
recording on YouTube. Of
There
every
is a
meeting.
recording on
Yes.
YouTube, but nothing in record form.
No.
Okay. The other thing is, any part of this process, does the consultant identify any grants from the state or any other additional funding to support? For example, 25 years ago, when this issue came up with Chancellor Center, I was very much involved. There are some state grants
that support renovation of historical buildings. Also, to your point about a Marriott versus, I don't know, whatever, that, at that point, we said to them, okay, you don't want to use this building, so we're gonna build a brand new building with space and plumbing and roads and all of that. So a lot of the decision is, what do you actually need versus what you want, which all of us face those decisions every single day. The other question I have is on training. Do you really need to do your training here? I just retired from working 40 years in corporations, hospitals. Sometimes when we did our training, we did it off-site. We didn't do it at our facility because we didn't have a site. Does it make sense to spend the money to have a training center? How much is it going to be utilized? So for me as a taxpayer, and now I'm a retired taxpayer, I want to make sure you're spending what we need versus what we might want. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Public comment? Anyone? Going once? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Nancy Panic, I live right here on Congress Street. My concern is that you've been, if I have to figure something out, you've been the administration staff that's been in this building for 21 years. If there's so much that has to be done, I mean, a radical, I guess, improvement to this building, what have you been doing all these years? And how have you been spending the money? This is where Council Rock started. And I actually don't want to hear that it's not been maintained by you. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may,
Yeah,
we have invested a significant amount of money in maintaining this building.
I have too.
Taxpayers have, the district, I agree completely. And that's why we're exploring what makes sense fiscally to continue to maintain this building or look at other options. We're just looking at options. But your point's well taken, thank you.
In the meantime, can we keep this building safe and secure?
It is, I would say that how should I put it? We are maintaining the building in a sufficient manner so that it's not disintegrating. We're not neglecting any serious building issues. This is really about the future.
Well, then why move out?
We haven't made that decision at all.
Oh, good,
Yeah, no, it's the beginning of the conversation.
good. Thank you.
Point well taken. Ma'am, you wish, ma'am, do you wish to comment?
Oh, me, no, I just gave a friendly smile and a
Good.
nod.
Thank
We're all
you.
learning, so
Thank you.
I'm good, thanks.
Anybody else? No? All right. If nobody objects, meeting adjourned. Thank you.